My name is Jana, 33 years old. The weight of my nursing bag slipped from my shoulder and landed with a muted thud on the cool concrete step. For a moment, I just stood there, gripping the railing, my breath caught halfway between inhale and exhale. The basement air carried its familiar mixture of detergent, dampness, and something older, something that clung to the cinder block walls, no matter how many dehumidifiers hummed in the corners. But what froze me wasn't the smell, it was the sight before me. The twins' belongings, beds, toy chests, Milo's stuffed bear with the missing ear, Tessa's purple unicorn with the faded mane, clustered together near the water heater, a sad little island of childhood in a space meant for pipes and storage. Their dressers, once lined with stickers and crayon doodles, looked shrunken against the furnace's looming shadow. I blinked, waiting for the image to correct itself, as though my exhaustion had conjured a cruel hallucination. "Mom? Dad?" My voice ricocheted against the cement. The washing machine rattled in the background, spinning a cycle like this was just another ordinary day. Footsteps above. Then my mother appeared at the top of the stairs, cradling my sister's baby Caleb against her shoulder. Her smile, automatic at the sight of the baby, faltered when her gaze slid to me. "Oh, Jana, you're home early." Her tone was casual, too casual. She avoided my eyes. I gestured toward the beds. "What is this? Why are Tessa and Milo's things down here?" My father's figure emerged behind her, his arms already crossed, the posture of judgment he'd perfected through decades. "We needed to make some changes," he said. "Changes?" My voice cracked on the word. "Autumn needs a proper office for her remote work," Mom said, bouncing Caleb gently as he fussed. "And Caleb deserves a real nursery." The word stung. A real nursery? As opposed to what? A fake one? The twins had real bedrooms upstairs. Mom sighed, the sound heavy with that mix of disappointment and superiority I'd grown up under. "Jana, don't be difficult. Autumn's situation is different. She needs stability right now, and Caleb is at a critical developmental stage." My hands trembled, though I pressed them flat against the railing to hide it. "And my children aren't? Milo has asthma. You've shoved him into the dampest room in the house." Dad's voice slid into that low, authoritative register that had silenced me as a child. "You're overreacting. The basement is perfectly adequate. Plenty of families would be grateful for the space." The word adequate felt like gravel in my mouth. "You had no right to move their things without asking me," I said, each word sharpened by a thin layer of steel I hadn't planned. "They are my children." "Your sister's career is taking off," Dad said, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. "Her future matters, and Caleb's development can't be compromised." Mom adjusted Caleb on her hip, her tone softening in that placating way that always masked manipulation. "You should be grateful we're giving you all a place to stay. Many children have less." Less. The word cracked against me like a whip. I thought of the day 3 months ago when I drove up this driveway, divorce papers still warm from the printer, my twins silent in the back seat as I promised them Grandma and Grandpa's house would be safe, just for a little while. I'd swallowed my pride, agreed to contribute money for groceries and utilities, even though this was supposed to be my safety net. Then autumn arrived, marriage crumbling, baby in her arms, and unlike me, she was received with open arms, with accommodation, with grace. The contrast had been relentless, cooing over Caleb's babbles while scolding the twins for laughing too loud. Praise for Autumn's exhaustion, while my double shifts barely earned a nod. The lines had been drawn quietly, long before today. And now, with a single rearrangement of furniture, the truth was undeniable. My children mattered less. "I won't accept this," I said, climbing 2 steps until we were nearly level. My voice shook, but the words landed. "You don't get to shove my kids underground so Caleb can have sunlight." Autumn appeared then, drawn by the raised voices. Her expression wavered between guilt and stubborn resolve. "The twins will adjust," she said softly. "Kids are resilient." I stared at her. Convenient how that only applies to my kids. For a moment, silence swelled in the stairwell, only broken by Caleb's hiccuping cries. Mom rocked him, gaze fixed on the baby rather than me. Dad shifted his weight, his mouth a thin line. Autumn's arms tightened around her son as though bracing against accusation. I felt my phone buzz in my pocket, a reminder. Brenda, my colleague, had mentioned her mother-in-law's cottage, emergency housing, small but available. She'd smiled gently when she said it, as if she already knew how close I was to breaking. I pulled the phone free, thumb hovering over the screen. "What are you doing?" Mom asked, frowning. "Making other arrangements," I said simply. The calm in my tone surprised even me. Dad scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous. Where would you go on a nurse's salary? You need us." "No," I said quietly, slipping the phone back into my pocket. "My children need me, and I won't let them believe this is all they deserve." I descended the steps, the cold floor biting through my shoes. Kneeling, I brushed dust from Tessa's clarinet case, the one she'd begged for on her last birthday, the one she practiced with until the house complained she was too loud. My reflection wavered in its glossy black surface, drawn, tired, but still mine. Above me, I felt their eyes. Mom's pity, Dad's irritation, Autumn's unease. I didn't meet them. Not yet. Instead, I touched the clarinet case gently, like a vow, and thought, this is not where their childhood will be lived. Sleep wouldn't come that night. The basement ceiling creaked with every footstep overhead, each groan of the floorboards a reminder of what loomed above us. My sister's freshly painted nursery, where my children's laughter had once lived. Milo's cough had finally eased into shallow breaths, his small body curled around his bear. Tessa, ever determined to show strength, had lined her unicorn figurines along the concrete ledge as if decoration could disguise the chill. But I had seen the tears she wiped quickly, thinking I hadn't noticed. I climbed the stairs for a glass of water, my bones aching from the 12-hour shift I'd just survived. The house was silent, except for the refrigerator's hum and the faint blue glow spilling from the kitchen. Autumn's laptop sat open on the counter, abandoned mid-task. I should have turned away. I knew better. But curiosity has its own pulse, and tonight mine beat too loud to ignore. The screen blinked with a new message notification. My sister's name glowed in bold. Against every instinct of privacy, I leaned closer. Mom said we can just put them in the basement. Autumn's message, dated 3 weeks ago. My stomach dropped. I scrolled. Celine works so much she'll barely notice. The twins are used to making do. The reply, a friend of hers, punctuated with laughing emojis. Your sister is such a doormat. The words blurred, but the meaning was sharp, slicing through me cleanly. This hadn't been a sudden choice made out of necessity. It was a plan, weeks of discussion. While I cooked meals, while I watched Caleb, while I paid bills, they plotted to push my children out of sight. I pressed a hand against my mouth to keep from gasping aloud. Footsteps above, Caleb's cry, then Mom's voice, soothing. My pulse hammered as I stepped back from the counter, filling a glass with trembling hands, just as Autumn descended, her voice casual. "Oh, you're still up. Mom's got Caleb. He's teething again." I swallowed, water cold against the rawness in my throat. "I know," I said. My voice sounded unfamiliar, metallic. "I've been giving him tablets during my shifts." Her smile flickered, faltered. Maybe she caught something in my tone, but she let it drop. Later, when the twins were tucked in their basement beds, I found myself summoned to the kitchen table. Dad sat at the head, Mom beside him with her hand on Autumn's wrist, a picture of unity. Caleb dozed in his rocker, the steady rise and fall of his chest a lull against the tension vibrating in the air. "The basement arrangement is temporary," Dad said, not meeting my eyes, "until we figure out something permanent." I gripped the edge of the table. "What does that mean exactly?" Mom smoothed Caleb's blanket, her voice syrupy with reason. "Well, since Autumn's planning to stay indefinitely, we need to consider the long-term needs of everyone." "Indefinitely?" The word struck like a gavel. "My therapist says stability is crucial right now," Autumn offered, her tone calm, rehearsed. "Caleb needs consistency." "And what about my children's stability?" My voice rose sharper than I intended. "Do they not deserve the same?" Dad's shoulders stiffened. "Don't be dramatic. It's a roof over their heads." I forced myself not to flinch. "A roof I help pay for. My contributions cover more than a third of the expenses." A look passed between my parents, subtle but telling. "About those contributions," Mom began, her voice sliding into the soothing cadence she'd always used to diffuse me. "We thought it made sense to pool resources. Autumn needs help with Caleb's expenses. Since you're already established..." The realization burned. "You've been giving my money to Autumn?" "Not all of it," Dad said quickly, waving a hand. "Just enough to get her back on her feet. While my kids sleep in a basement," my hands pressed flat on the table to keep them from shaking. Dad's mouth twisted into a smirk I'd seen too many times. If you're that unhappy, you could pitch a tent in the yard. At least the twins would have windows. The words hung, cruel and heavy. No one laughed. Even Autumn's gaze dropped, though she said nothing in my defense. The silence felt suffocating, and yet I let it stretch, filling the kitchen until even Caleb stirred uneasily. Finally, I stood, forcing calm into my voice. Thank you for the clarity. Jana, don't start with ultimatums, Mom said quickly. We're trying to make this work for everyone. For everyone, I echoed, lifting my bag from the chair. Funny how that always seems to exclude my children. I walked out, but not before catching the flicker in Dad's eyes. Something that looked less like triumph and more like unease. For the first time, perhaps, he realized I wasn't bluffing. In the basement, I leaned against the cold wall, phone in hand, scrolling through numbers until I reached Brenda's. I didn't text, not yet, but I hovered over the contact, the blue glow of the screen reflecting off my tears. Because tonight the line had been drawn, and I knew, sooner rather than later, I would have to cross it. Morning sunlight barely touched the basement. Even when it seeped through the slim windows near the ceiling, it arrived diluted, pale, as though ashamed to intrude. I sat on the edge of Milo's bed, the humid chill clinging to my scrubs, and watched him fumble with his inhaler. His logbook, something the pediatrician had asked us to keep, lay open on the nightstand. The inked tally marks told their own story. Double the puffs since moving down here. Better? I asked softly. He nodded, shoulders rising in a shallow breath, but his eyes betrayed fatigue. He was only 11, but he looked older when he was tired, lines of weariness carving through a boy who should have been carefree. Across the room, Tessa adjusted the strap of her clarinet case. She had begged to practice before school, but when she carried it upstairs last night, Mom had intercepted her with a hushed warning. Caleb's nap can't be disturbed. The clarinet was returned to its corner in silence. Now she pressed her lips together, pretending the disappointment didn't sting. But I saw the way her fingers tapped restlessly against the case, craving keys and notes. At breakfast, the tension followed us upstairs. Dad read the paper, his glasses perched low on his nose. Mom cooed over Caleb's mashed bananas. Autumn scrolled her phone, nodding absently at something on her screen. I set bowls in front of the twins, only for Mom to clear her throat. Jana, maybe it's best if the kids eat downstairs from now on. Milo's coughing upset Caleb last night. My hand froze on the spoon. They're not contagious, it's asthma. Still, she said, her eyes darting to Caleb, it disrupts the household. The twins glanced at me, then back at their untouched cereal. They didn't argue. Their silence was louder than any protest. I caught Brenda in the hospital hallway later that week. My hands shook as I swapped IV bags, exhaustion painting shadows under my eyes. She placed a hand on my shoulder, eyes scanning me, the way only another nurse could. You're burning out, she murmured. I gave a short laugh. That's the job. No, she said, slipping something folded into my pocket. That's survival. This is a lifeline. When I opened it later in the supply closet, my breath caught. A 3-bedroom rental, unlisted. Maple Street, still in the twin school district. Owner a friend of Brenda's husband. Available soon if I wanted it. I held the paper as if it might dissolve. The same night, relatives poured into the house. Aunt Cynthia, Uncle Pete, and cousins filled the living room with chatter. I slipped off my shoes, bone-weary from a double shift, but Mom's voice rang out with exaggerated cheer. There she is, perfect timing. We were just about to show everyone Caleb's nursery. Nursery. The word curled like smoke in my chest. Autumn beamed, hoisting Caleb proudly. Come upstairs. It's perfect now. I followed reluctantly, each step up the staircase a weight on my chest. The room that had been Tessa's, her shelves once stacked with books she loved, her window seat where she'd read aloud to Milo, was transformed. Fresh paint gleamed. Custom shelving lined the walls. Cushions plumped against the window seat where she had once begged for comfort. Just what a growing boy needs, Aunt Cynthia declared, her hand stroking the polished crib. Uncle Pete grinned. Your twins must be so accommodating, letting their cousin have such a nice space. My mouth filled with the taste of copper. They didn't exactly have a choice. Silence cracked the air, until Mom jumped in with her well-practiced smile. We're planning to make the basement into a proper bedroom eventually. Eventually, Dad echoed. But first, the kitchen needs redoing. Autumn requires workspace for Caleb's organic meals. Their words blurred as my gaze fell on the details. The crib's expensive mattress, the shelves stocked with toys Caleb was too young to even use, the framed prints carefully hung. All the things my children had asked for and been denied. When I slipped away, I found Milo curled beneath his quilt, coughing into his pillow. Tessa sat beside him, stroking his back, her clarinet case unopened at her feet. "Is dinner ready?" Milo asked when he saw me. His voice was thin. "Almost, buddy." I kissed his damp hair, holding him as another cough rattled through his chest. "How's the breathing today?" "The same," he muttered, shoulders sagging. The pediatrician's warning echoed in my mind. Environmental factors are aggravating the condition. Translation: the basement was making my boy sick. Later that night, I tucked them in. Milo clutched his inhaler tighter than his bear. Tessa whispered that she didn't want to invite anyone over anymore. "Why not?" I asked gently. Her eyes shone in the dim light. "Nobody else lives in a basement." The truth of it sliced me open. Upstairs, laughter erupted from the dining room. More cooing over Caleb. More approval for Autumn's resilience. I sat on the basement steps, the folded rental listing heavy in my pocket, and realized this house had become a stage. A stage where my children were shoved behind curtains while the baby glowed in the spotlight. And I knew, if I stayed, they would learn to live small. That night, exhaustion and resolve braided together. A plan was forming, quiet but steady, like breath-filling lungs after too long underwater. Sunday dinners had become performances. The table stretched under steaming dishes, laughter too loud, stories exaggerated for effect. I slipped into my chair, already bracing for the weight of unspoken comparisons. Tessa and Milo sat stiff beside me, their smiles polite masks they'd perfected these past months. Halfway through the meal, Aunt Linda, Dad's older sister, the one who never learned tact, set her fork down and asked the question no one else dared. "Don't the twins mind living in the basement?" The room froze. Mom's smile turned brittle, her fingers tightening around her water glass. Dad cleared his throat, preparing to smooth over the discomfort. Autumn busied herself with spooning mashed peas into Caleb's bowl, eyes fixed downward. I set my napkin beside my plate. My voice came calm, almost serene. "They mind very much, which is why we're moving out next week." The silence shattered into gasps and clattering silverware. Mom's glass tipped, water spilling across the tablecloth. Dad's face darkened like a storm cloud. "What do you mean moving out?" Autumn's voice rose, sharp with disbelief. "I've signed a lease," I said simply. 3 bedrooms, still in the school district. "You can't just decide this," Mom sputtered, grabbing at the tablecloth as if to steady herself. "I can, actually." My gaze swept the table, landing on Aunt Linda's widened eyes, the only face not masked by denial. "My children deserve better than a basement." "This is about money, isn't it?" Dad pressed, his tone accusatory. "We can work something out." "It's not about money," I interrupted. Steady now, the tremor gone. "It's about respect." The words hung, thick and undeniable. For once, no one interrupted. Caleb's spoon clattered onto his high-chair tray, the sound oddly final. That night, when the house had gone quiet, I dialed Brenda. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm, unhesitating. "You can stay with us until the place is ready. The guest room's small, but the pull-out couch is decent." "I can't ask you—" "You're not asking," she said firmly. "I'm offering. What your parents are doing isn't right." Her certainty loosened something in me I hadn't realized was clenched. Gratitude burned behind my ribs. From that night on, I moved in secret. While the family debated decorations for Caleb's half-birthday, balloons, cupcakes, which filter would best capture his 6-month milestone, I was packing essentials. Suitcases appeared one by one in the basement, tucked behind old trunks. I folded Tessa's books into neat stacks, slid Milo's medals into zippered compartments, tucked both their quilts at the top so they'd feel like home wherever we landed. Each task felt like an act of rebellion, quiet but mighty. The twins noticed, of course. One evening, I caught Tessa watching me as I zipped a bag shut. "Are we really leaving?" she whispered. I paused, met her hopeful eyes, and nodded. "Yes, soon." Milo clutched his inhaler less tightly that night, his breaths easier, as though the promise itself cleared the air. By the time Caleb's half-birthday party filled the calendar, my plan was airtight. The lease signed, utilities arranged, Brenda's guest room waiting. All that remained was timing. The thought steadied me as I folded another shirt into a suitcase. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt control slip back into my hands, not the brittle control of appeasement, but the firm, steady kind that builds futures. And when I looked at my children, sitting cross-legged on their beds in that damp basement, I saw the same spark flicker back into their eyes. We were ready. The morning we left was stitched together with silence. Dawn barely brushed the horizon, pale light sliding between blinds as I nudged Tessa awake. She blinked, confused at first, until she saw the packed backpacks waiting by the door. Her eyes widened, and she sat up straighter than I'd seen in months. "Today?" she whispered. I nodded. "Today." Milo stirred next, his small hand gripping the inhaler he kept under his pillow. "Are we really leaving?" His voice carried disbelief, as though saying it aloud might shatter the possibility. "Yes, buddy, get dressed." We moved quickly, quietly, like a team in a code blue drill. Brenda's minivan idled in the driveway, its headlights dimmed, her silhouette steady at the wheel. I loaded the first round of boxes, essentials only. Milo's medals, Tessa's clarinet, their quilts folded neatly on top. Treasures that smelled of childhood and resilience. The house was still asleep. Upstairs, the hum of the baby monitor filled the halls. Mom and Dad wouldn't stir for another hour, not until Caleb's cries demanded attention. Inside the basement, I crouched beside my children. Remember, just what matters most. We'll come back for the rest later. They moved with surprising deliberation. Tessa cradled her stack of books as if they were glass. Milo tucked his telescope under one arm, the strap of his science kit slung across his shoulder. Each item they chose carried weight beyond its function. Each was a declaration. This is who I am, and I won't leave it behind. By 7:30, the van was full. I set the last box down, glanced back at the basement one final time. Shadows stretched long across the cement floor. The smell of mildew clung to the air. It already felt foreign, as though we'd outgrown it overnight. On the kitchen counter, I placed the house key next to a folded note. I'd rewritten it a dozen times, each draft too long, too emotional, until I stripped it down to the truth. We found our own place. The twins deserve windows. When I closed the door behind me, I didn't look back. At Brenda's, the guest room was small but sunlit. Tessa's quilt transformed the cot into something cozy. Milo lined his medals along the windowsill, where light touched them with pride. It wasn't permanent, but it was safe. By afternoon, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Unknown numbers, familiar numbers. I silenced them all until one voicemail forced itself through. Mom's voice, sharp and indignant. "Jana, this is completely inappropriate. You're traumatizing Autumn by leaving like this. Caleb can sense the tension. Call us immediately." Dad's message followed, clipped and stern. "I can't believe you'd do this to family. You've embarrassed us." Then Autumn, her voice breaking just enough to sound convincing. "How could you? You've abandoned us when we needed you most." But every word, every accusation only solidified my resolve, because none of them mentioned Milo's cough. None of them mentioned Tessa's silence. None of them mentioned the children who had been pushed below ground so Caleb could live in sunlight. That evening, as the twins unpacked, Tessa's clarinet filled the apartment with music. The notes wavered at first, rusty from disuse, but soon they soared, clear and confident. Milo lay back on his quilt, listening with a smile. His breathing was easier already. I sat in the doorway, tears blurring the edges of the scene. For the first time in months, maybe years, our home was filled with sound that belonged to us. And yet, even in that moment of relief, the next choice loomed. A message from my supervisor blinked on my phone. "Charge nurse position still open. Interested?" I stared at it, the weight of responsibility pressing close. Better pay, more authority, a chance to rebuild the career I'd nearly sacrificed, but more hours, more time pulled away from the very children I'd just fought to protect. The decision would have to wait. For now, I listened to the clarinet, the rise and fall of music threading hope into our first night of freedom. And I promised myself, whatever storms came next, they would find us here, in rooms with air and light, no longer hidden underground. The first week away from my parents' house felt like stepping into a different universe. Sunlight flooded Brenda's guest room every morning, golden and insistent, brushing across Tessa's face as she practiced scales on her clarinet. Milo lined rocks along the windowsill, humming quietly, his breathing steady, no cough interrupting his rhythm. It took me a moment to recognize what had changed. It wasn't just the air, it was the silence. No footsteps overhead reminding us of where we didn't belong, no shushing voices pressing us to stay small. On Saturday, Brenda showed up with reinforcements. Joanne from pediatrics hauled in a small television. Marcus from the ER carried a desk under one arm. "We raided the hospital donation closet," he said, grinning as Milo's eyes lit up at the desk. "Families leave good stuff behind. No reason it should go to waste." By the time they left, our modest apartment felt less like a stopgap and more like a home. The couch sagged but invited comfort. The mismatched curtains made Tessa's room glow lavender when the sun hit just right. Milo stuck glow-in-the-dark stars to the ceiling, his telescope proudly stationed by the window. That night, when Tessa filled the air with a confident run of notes, Brenda leaned back and whispered, "Listen." "To what?" I asked. "Exactly," she said, and I realized she meant the absence of coughs, the absence of apologies, the presence of sound that belonged wholly to us. Days blurred into a rhythm. Work shifts, unpacking, helping the kids settle. Milo started explaining constellations to me at dinner, his voice animated again. Tessa accepted an invitation to join advanced band, cheeks flushed with pride. Slowly, they were becoming themselves again. Then came the message. From Dad. Short, deliberate. "We need to talk. May I visit?" My stomach tightened, but I showed the twins. Tessa's fingers stilled on her clarinet. Milo looked at me, wide-eyed. "Do we have to?" he asked. "No," I said, "not unless we want to." But curiosity, or perhaps obligation, pulled me. I replied, "Yes, tomorrow." The knock came mid-afternoon. When I opened the door, my parents stood there, Autumn just behind them with Caleb perched on her hip. Dad carried a gift bag covered in cartoon dinosaurs. "You didn't have to bring gifts," I said, stepping aside. "We thought the twins might appreciate something from home," Mom said, her smile tight. "This is their home now," I answered. They stepped in, eyes darting over secondhand furniture, children's artwork taped to the walls, the lavender and blue glow from the kids' rooms. Autumn's gaze flicked nervously from detail to detail. "It's cozy," she said, politeness strangling her voice. Dad cleared his throat. "We might have been hasty with our arrangements. We could move things around, give the twins an upstairs bedroom instead of the basement." "Share a room, you mean?" I asked. "Instead of windows, instead of their own space? You call that better?" "You're punishing the family," Autumn burst out suddenly, her composure cracking. "The twins miss their cousins. Caleb needs his aunt." My jaw tightened. My children aren't bargaining chips, and they're not being used to punish anyone. Behind me, I felt Tessa's hand slide into mine. Milo lingered in the hallway, eyes cautious, inhaler dangling loosely at his side. "Would you like to show them around?" I asked softly, directing the question to my children. Tessa nodded, a spark of pride in her eyes. She opened her door first, revealing shelves crammed with her favorite books, her clarinet stand positioned by the window where natural light pooled. "My friend Brenda's daughter outgrew this desk," I explained, brushing my hand across its surface. "Perfect for homework and practice." Next, Milo ushered them into his room. The walls painted a bold blue, glow-in-the-dark constellations overhead. His telescope angled toward the park across the street. "There's a soccer field," he said, his voice rising with excitement, "and I don't need my inhaler as much since we moved." Mom's face softened, guilt flashing before she masked it. "This must be expensive," she murmured. "My children aren't bargaining chips," I repeated, quieter this time, but with more weight. "They deserve respect, the same as Caleb." Back in the living room, Tessa lifted her clarinet, lips firm on the mouthpiece. A cascade of notes filled the air, warm and bold, vibrating against the walls. No one told her to stop. No one silenced her. Dad watched her, unreadable. Mom bounced Caleb absently, her gaze flickering to Milo's easy smile. Autumn lingered by the door, her grip tight on her phone. Then she asked, almost carelessly, "Who's watching Caleb next Tuesday? I have an interview." The music faltered. Tessa lowered her clarinet, realization dawning in her eyes. I met Autumn's gaze. "I'm sure you'll figure something out. You're resourceful." Her cheeks flushed. Silence swallowed the room. When they finally gathered to leave, Dad lingered at the threshold. "Jana," he said, voice lower than I'd heard in years. "Could I speak to you privately?" I hesitated. The twins exchanged worried glances, but I nodded. We stepped onto the small balcony, the afternoon light spilling across cracked concrete. Inside, I could see Milo showing Grandma the view from his telescope. Tessa carefully placing her clarinet back in its case. Whatever Dad had to say, the truth was already clear. We weren't the family they thought they could control anymore. The balcony was small, its railing rusted at the edges, the view nothing more than a strip of street and the canopy of the park beyond. Dad stood with his hands in his pockets, his posture stiff, like a man preparing for a courtroom defense rather than a family talk. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The muffled sound of Tessa's clarinet case clicking shut drifted through the glass door. Milo's laugh followed, light, unguarded, a sound I hadn't heard in months. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "Jenna, I may have handled things poorly." "Poorly," I repeated, the word tasting bitter. "That's one way to put it." His eyes flicked toward the park, refusing to meet mine. We thought we were helping Autumn. She needed more support than you did." I folded my arms. Support doesn't mean taking from one child to give to another. It doesn't mean pushing my kids into a basement while hers gets a nursery. His jaw tightened. "You don't understand. Your mother was worried about appearances, family reputation. People talk when marriages fail, when children come back home. We thought if we could show Autumn was on her feet, it would balance the story." "Balance the story?" My voice rose before I pulled it back down. "This isn't about stories. It's about children. Real lives. My son's asthma, my daughter's music." For the first time, he looked directly at me. There was pride there, but twisted into something unrecognizable by years of control. "You've always been strong, independent. We thought you could take it, that your kids could take it." The words cracked something in me, not anger this time, but a weary understanding. They hadn't believed we needed care because we'd learned to survive without it. "You were wrong," I said simply. He shifted uncomfortably, the weight of his pride pressing down on his shoulders. "What if we moved things around? Gave the twins one of the upstairs rooms again?" "They already have rooms," I countered, "with windows, with dignity. You can't fix this by rearranging furniture." His mouth opened, closed, silence stretched. Then he sighed, heavy, defeated. "Your mother's afraid you'll cut us off completely." "That depends," I said, voice level, "on whether you see my children as equal, on whether you stop treating me as a convenient wallet and babysitter." From inside, Autumn's voice carried faintly, sharp with irritation. "Caleb's fussy. Where's his pacifier?" Mom murmured something soothing, her footsteps quick across the floor. I held Dad's gaze. "If you want to be part of our lives, the terms are simple. Respect my kids. Respect me. No more siphoning money. No more favors disguised as debts. If you can't do that, then distance is safer." His shoulders sagged. For once, there was no retort, no thunderous lecture. Just a man caught between pride and regret. "We'll try," he said finally. I nodded. "That's all I'll accept. Trying. With actions, not words." When we stepped back inside, the room was subdued. Mom rocked Caleb with distracted affection, Autumn scrolling her phone as if waiting for someone else to relieve her burden. Tessa and Milo stood a little apart, watching, gauging. "Time to go," Dad announced, his voice quieter than usual. He guided Mom toward the door, Autumn trailing reluctantly behind. At the threshold, Mom turned. "Jana, maybe next week, dinner, just us." "Maybe," I said. Not a promise, not yet. When the door shut, the silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was light, almost freeing. The twins rushed to me. Tessa's eyes searched mine. "Are they going to take us back to the basement?" I shook my head. "No, honey, this is our home now. The only way back is if they choose respect." Milo slipped his hand into mine, his grip firm. "Then they'll have to change a lot." "Yes," I said, pulling both of them close. "They will." That night, as I tucked them into their separate beds, I saw the change already blooming. Shoulders straighter, breathing easier, music filling the air without shame. And for the first time, I allowed myself to think not just about survival, but about what came next. 6 months later, I sat at a polished desk across from the loan officer, pen poised above a stack of papers that seemed endless. Each page carried a weight my body remembered. Nights in a damp basement, Milo's ragged coughs, Tessa's silenced clarinet. "Congratulations, Ms. Dalton," the officer said, sliding a set of keys across the desk. The metal was cool against my palm, a key to a modest 3-bedroom house with windows that faced the sunrise. My own house, my children's house, not borrowed space, not conditional kindness. Ours. As I left the office, sunlight caught the keys and glinted gold. I thought of that basement, the first moment I saw my twins' lives crammed near the water heater. The memory nearly took my breath away, the contrast so sharp it hurt. At work, things had shifted too. I'd taken the charge nurse position, and with it came better pay and a steadier schedule. No more scrambling for every overtime shift, no more bargaining with exhaustion. Colleagues now looked to me for answers. Even Dr. Patel, known for his clipped authority, had asked my opinion on a complicated case the week before. But it was home where the transformation felt most profound. On a Saturday evening, I walked through the front door and found Tessa in the kitchen, clarinet in hand. She finished a piece before setting the instrument down, her face glowing with pride. "Principal Hayes asked me to join advanced band," she announced. In the living room, Milo hunched over the dining table, his volcano project mid-eruption, baking soda fizz spilling onto poster board. "Mrs. Wilson says I might win first place at the science fair," his cheeks flushed with excitement. The walls themselves seemed to hold their joy, echoing with laughter instead of muffled tears. That evening, Mom called. I let the phone ring twice before answering, a deliberate pause. "We'd like you and the twins to come for Sunday dinner," she said, her voice tentative in a way I'd never heard before. "Just us. Your father's grilling steaks." I hesitated. "Just us?" "Yes. Autumn moved back to her condo last month. Caleb's nursery is empty now." The admission hung in the air. I exhaled slowly. "We'd be happy to come, but we'll need to leave by 7. Tessa has band practice early Monday." The old Jana would have said yes without conditions, desperate to be included. The new one set boundaries. "That's fine," Mom said quickly. "We understand." Saturday came, and our house filled with warmth. Brenda brought a potted fern. Joanne carried a welcome mat. Marcus arrived with lasagna still steaming from the oven. "To new beginnings," Brenda toasted, raising her glass. I felt tears prick my eyes, but they were different this time. Not the helpless kind. The kind born from gratitude, from knowing we'd built something out of rubble and refusal. Later, paint speckled our hands as Milo and Tessa argued playfully about where to hang their posters. Tessa's lavender walls glowed in the lamplight. Milo's deep blue ceiling glittered with constellations. They laughed, and the house seemed to breathe with them. Then came the knock. I opened the door to find Dad standing there, toolbox in hand. His eyes scanned the room. Paint-stained clothes, posters leaning against walls, lasagna dishes stacked in the sink. "I thought you might need help mounting those bookshelves," he said. His voice was quieter than I remembered, rough around the edges. He set the toolbox down, paused, then added, almost awkwardly, "I'm proud of you, Jenna." The words hung between us, fragile and unfamiliar. I met his gaze, searching for sincerity, for cracks in the armor. For once, I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let it settle, heavy but honest. Inside, the kids laughed again, a sound so free it almost startled me. And I wondered, some bonds fracture beyond repair, but others, maybe, can be reforged if both sides are willing to bleed a little in the process. The bookshelves went up on a Sunday afternoon. Dad steadied the planks while I drilled, his hands less steady than I remembered, but sure enough to hold. The twins hovered nearby, passing us screws, their eyes darting between us as if waiting for the moment the truce would snap. It didn't. When we slid the final shelf into place, Milo cheered. Tessa immediately stacked her music books in neat rows, humming under her breath. Dad stepped back, wiping his brow. And for the first time in years, he looked less like an immovable wall and more like a man trying to build something fragile with his daughter. Mom visited later that week. She didn't bring excuses. Just a container of soup she'd made. Sitting at my kitchen table, she looked around at the drawings taped to the walls, the mismatched furniture that somehow fit, the light pouring through the open windows. "You've done well," she said quietly. Then, after a pause, "I'm sorry for how things happened. We thought we were helping. We didn't see what it cost you." Her apology wasn't perfect, but it was more than I expected. I nodded, accepting it for what it was, a beginning, not a resolution. The terms had already been set. Visits would happen, but on my ground. No more siphoning of money, no more veiled demands for childcare. If they wanted a place in our lives, it would be earned through respect. Meanwhile, I started my BSN courses online. Late nights after shifts, I hunched over textbooks while the twins slept, the glow of my desk lamp the only witness to the hours I clawed back for myself. A college fund account opened for them, small deposits at first, growing steadier each month. One evening, Tessa burst through the door, clarinet case swinging. "Mom, we're playing at the spring concert. I got a solo." Milo followed, eyes alight. "My science project won second place. They're going to display it in the hallway." I pulled them both close, breathing in their laughter, the scent of sunshine still clinging to their hair. Later, I found Milo by the window, adjusting his telescope. "Can we paint my room again?" he asked, this time with real constellations, not just stickers. "Of course," I said. "We'll do it together." Tessa practiced scales in her lavender room, each note ringing clear, unshackled by fear of disturbing anyone. She didn't know I stood in the hallway, tears slipping silently down my cheeks. It wasn't just about music or science projects. It was about what they were learning, that they deserved space, light, respect, that when the world told them to shrink, they could push back and claim their ground. One night, after the kids were asleep, I sat on the porch, the keys to our house heavy but reassuring in my hand. They no longer felt like borrowed mercy. They felt like victory. My phone buzzed with a message from Aunt Linda. "Your father says you're setting firm boundaries." "Good. Don't let them slip." I smiled. For once, someone in my family was rooting for me without conditions. Inside, Milo shifted in his sleep, breathing easy. Tessa's clarinet leaned against her desk, waiting for tomorrow's practice. The house itself seemed to exhale with us, full of light and air instead of mildew and shame. And I thought, this is what we teach our children, not just through words, but through the walls we choose for them, the air they breathe, the space we demand on their behalf. My parents might never fully understand. Autumn might never forgive. But my children, they would know. They would know they were never basement children. They were children of windows, of light, of respect. And as long as I had strength in my body, that's how it would stay.